All right, I think we have everyone. Oops, let me back up a second. So welcome everyone to this Big Heart seminar for today. My name is Jen Balkas. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a faculty member in the EPI department at the University of Washington School of Public Health. And this session is being recorded. And this is our first session as part of the Big Heart seminar series that's really focusing on mentorship. So we're super excited for our panel today. Before we get started, I just want to go through a few things for the session. I'll turn it over to our incredible speakers. First is to acknowledge where the UW is housed, especially the Seattle campus. So at the UW that we learn and teach and live on or near the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish peoples, whose ancestors have resided here since time immemorial. The UW Seattle campus in particular is situated on the traditional territory of the Duwamish people. The Coast Salish peoples and many other indigenous peoples continue to thrive in the lands and are alive and strong. And we're happy to be talking about mentorship today, about indigenous scholars that will be sharing lots of, I think, great stories and lessons today. Oops. Move forward. So just to orient folks as to the Big Heart program and seminar series. So this is the second year of this program, which really focuses on providing opportunities for scholars at the undergraduate and graduate level related to HIV research. So we have different meetings and mentorship opportunities. The goals are really to connect these scholars with HIV researchers from across the field of HIV science, so all forms of science at different events, and learn about different opportunities for internships and job opportunities. So if you're watching this as a mentor or as someone who's interested in HIV research, there's more information on our website about how to become a Big Heart Scholar and engage with these different opportunities that we'll have throughout the year. And related to that is our seminar series that really highlights researchers who are Indigenous and working in HIV research. We had our first session in November with Dr. Matt Town, who shared his work on PrEP, which was fantastic. And all our sessions are recorded. So if you happen to miss it, you can go back and see it and view it at a later date. And then I wanted to share another opportunity from the iHeart 3 ITSA program. This is from the Indigenous Wellness Research Institute and investigators. And this one really focuses on those that are a little further along their research career. So individuals who already have their doctoral training and are interested in research. Is a great opportunity that is opening up for applications, I believe, starting in January. So please check out the website, which is also on the link if this applies to you as well. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to our fantastic panel. We are so lucky to have in our presence Dr. Julie Baldwin, Dr. Karina Walters, who's also the co-director of Big Heart, and our own faculty member, Dr. Roberto Orellana, who are going to be sharing their experiences with us. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn things over to Karina, and then we will go from there. So Karina.
Well, halito sa hachipa. Karina Walters, good morning or afternoon, wherever you are viewing this today. My name is Karina Walters. I'm an enrolled member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. And I am just thrilled to be here with both Dr. Baldwin and Dr. Orellana. We hope to have this be kind of conversational style, but I'm going to just first set a little bit of the context. To talk about mentorship, we have to first talk about what's it like to be a Native person in academia, and especially through the pipeline and training. And so I'm going to spend just a few minutes on that, and then we'll turn to our conversation. But before I do that, I'd like both Dr. Baldwin and Dr. Orellana to please introduce themselves, and then I'll get started. Roberto, would you like to go?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Roberto Orellana, and I'm a professor in the School of Social Work at the University of Washington, and also faculty with CFAR and Birch, which is one of our centers for mental health and HIV prevention work. And I am Maya Cachiquel from Guatemala, and I was born and raised in a small village in Guatemala, and then I migrated with family to the U.S. At some point during my adolescence, and I've been working on HIV, mental health and trauma, the intersection of those three issues with different populations here in the US, as well as Central and South America, primarily with indigenous communities.
Thank you.
And good afternoon, everyone. I'm Julie Baldwin. I'm a Regents Professor at Northern Arizona University, and I also direct the Center for Health Equity Research here at NAU. I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, but I've spent most of my adult years really out here in the Southwest in Arizona and work with indigenous communities, mostly in this area, but really throughout the United States, and also internationally as well. A lot of my work has been focused on HIV and substance abuse prevention, working with youth and families and communities. The approach we take is very much a community-based participatory research type of approach in a lot of the work we do. And I've been really honored and privileged to be able to work with Karina, Roberto, and others at UW for several years as part of iHeart and some of the other programs. So it's really a pleasure to meet all of you today. Thanks.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Roberto. Well, first, just setting a little bit of the context. I'm just going to make about 7 points for us to think about today. First is we have to understand barriers to our faculty achievement and advancement should be contextualized within settler colonialism. And the ways to surmount these challenges is through decolonizing strategies. So I think I'm just throwing some of this out there because I hope that we address some of that today. But the unique status of Native people as members of sovereign nations basically renders the use of kind of familiar structural racism approaches and social justice approaches inadequate in terms of dealing with Indigenous people. And because settler colonialism is the context, we typically experience unique, diminishing settler colonial verbal and nonverbal messages from students, as well as colleagues in administration. Some Native scholars have talked about this as a form of settler anxiety that arises. It's kind of parallel to white fragility that you read about in the literature. And it arises because the mere presence of us in the academy is a reminder, whether conscious or not, that the settler colonial project is unfinished. So what happens is Native faculty are sometimes treated as not being real or authentic, or not being taken seriously because real Natives should no longer exist. And it's sometimes very unconscious processes that get played out in strange ways. Sometimes people employ all kinds of cognitive strategies and behavioral strategies to actually diminish Indigenous identity, render us invisible, and invisibility is a hallmark of settler colonialism. Quite often, the goal of settler colonialism is to erase us as Indigenous people. And sometimes that could be manifest as being ignored at meetings or not seen as credible in terms of authenticity challenges, or in another extreme way, being savable and dealing with really paternalistic attitudes, people constantly wanting to save us and fix us and help us. So that's a little bit of tasting of some of the conditions that we have to deal with in the academy. But even before we get to the academy, I just want to acknowledge huge barriers that we already deal with. There's really high educational disparities. We have the lowest high school graduation rates in the country, and we have the highest dropout rate, which is twice the national average of any U.S. ethnic or racial group. And the explanation of dropouts or pushouts cannot be explained by poverty or poor health alone. It's really the hostile school climates, environmental factors, and outdated stereotypical curricular material that account for a lot of the push-out experiences. We continue to still, the underrepresentation manifests all the way up to academia, right, at the highest levels. Less than 0.2% of all doctorates are American Indian or Alaska Native in the country. And if you want to know how many of us are full professors, and you're looking at 3 of them, we represent less than 0.07% of all Native faculty in the country. We just don't get this far usually. So what are some of the, what's the experiences of Natives in the academy? So these are things I think that really mentors should be thinking about. One is the institutional climate of research universities. That is a factor that is seldom addressed in mentorship research. Basically, people don't even really look at the culture in which we are actually living and embedded. And that culture tends to be primarily Western, white, European, individualistic, Cartesian worldview, which stands in stark contrast to collectivist, holistic, and interrelated worldviews for our Native communities. we see a lot of intersection between career obligations and family obligations. And the scholars quite often push to choose between prioritizing the culture of the workforce, such as long work hours, sacrificing critical family time, versus choosing family and thus relinquishing these really valued career paths. This kind of what some scholars call normative whiteness is so pervasive in research institutions that these values are seen as neutral, natural, and actually indeed superior. And unwittingly, sometimes non-Native faculty will use their own mentorship experiences to guide their mentorship experience with their Native colleagues. And what works for a non-Native faculty may not work for our Native colleagues. And I'll give you a brief example. There was a young Native American man who was quiet, and he was, wasn't really interacting with the faculty that much. And the white mentor was saying, well, you need to really use your voice and get, get known, get visible, talk up a little bit more in meetings and assert yourself. Well, the Native colleague did that, and his behavior was read as angry and not read as, confidence or, having that kind of point of view. So some of our non-Native colleagues' support for strategies may not translate appropriately in the case for Native communities. So those things have to be considered. The other one is cultural taxation, role overload, ambiguity, vocational stress. We're frequently asked to serve as liaisons between the university and tribal communities, roles for which we generally aren't compensated. We don't have like buyout or reduction in our work responsibilities. We tend to take care of our Native students, wanting to shield them from discrimination, trying to create some kind of cultural safety in a university setting. But this can even translate to a level of call of duty to fulfill cultural as well as community roles that happen simultaneously with academic roles. In some cases, Native faculty become almost surrogate parents or family members to Native students. I've done some research in this area. People help students out with loans, inviting them to family and community functions, and bailing them out of jail in one case. And then dealing with microaggression distress, that's the fourth element. I just want to throw that out there. Give you a good example of the one I experienced. I was asked by a colleague to come dressed as an Indian to give a lecture when I first arrived at the university. And I was like, wait, what? Did you really just ask me to come dressed as an Indian to give a lecture? Are you kidding me? And she says, okay, well, at least wear your costume. I'm like, what are you talking about? This is getting even worse. I'm not going to wear a costume. It's not a costume. You don't even know what? And she said, okay, at least wear earrings. I was like, it was a series of, I was just like, and what did I have to think about in that moment? I thought, oh, do I have tenure yet? Does she have tenure? What strategy do I take to address this? I used Indian humor. That was the best way to try to de-escalate the situation. And I said, no matter what I dress and how I dress, I'm still an Indian. and she's like, oh, okay, but can you come dressed still? Finally, I was like, wow. I said, I'll tell you what, I will definitely come dressed as an Indian. And I'm going to, as long as I can lecture your class on whatever I want to lecture on. And she said, oh, you've got a deal. That's great. So of course, what did I do? I wore my best, I had an Armani suit. I wore my best Armani suit into that class that day. Absolutely no jewelry, absolutely nothing that could mark me as Native in a non-Native world. And I walked into class and said, class, I'm dressed as an Indian today, and we're going to have a whole lecture on microaggressions. Anyways, with your instructor here. So unfortunately, my colleague did not get it. She's not here anymore, by the way, so please don't go start figuring out who this person is. And the final thought is mentorship. In terms of mentorship, we got to be thinking about this kind of climate that Native people kind of navigate, and this push to invisibilize us in institutions and settings. And quite often, we get these weird kind of sometimes interactions that emerge that are, people not wanting to be part of the settler colonial dynamic. So people try to, what we call as settler moves to innocence, which tries to minimize difference. And that actually isn't helpful. Kind of taking we are all human approach, or, oh, I have an oppressed status too, let me tell you about mine. That's not necessarily going to help. And the more extreme level is when somebody starts saying, I think maybe my great-great-grandmother was Native somewhere, somehow that diminishes the gulf that sometimes exists. And that's not always the best strategies to, I found in the research that I've done. Quite often it's really about being able to sit in our positionality and being able to really communicate openly and clearly with each other. And finally, there's real institutional things that we could do. Cluster hiring, not being the only Native, as I said at the beginning, quite often we're the only ones. Sometimes we're the only ones in the whole university. And that is both socially and culturally and intellectually isolating. And so I think, moving to hiring cluster hires and having those kinds of experiences are important. So I'm going to end there. Those are just some of the ideas to start sparking conversation and discussion. And so, yeah, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues here and see what they have to share and what they're thinking about some of that. Roberto or Julie, either
Do you
one.
want to start, Roberto?
Well, there's lots of thoughts going on, but I guess of the several points that I guess I want to start is for all of us and the audience to think about that statistic of the less than 1%, right? Like less than 0.7%. And for Native women, it's less than 0.5, right? And that we are all engaged in efforts to increase the pipeline of students coming to our institutions. And there's not going to be enough mentors, right? So we're working to increase the pipeline. So there will be a few more mentors, but it's going to be a while till we have enough. And in that, for Native and especially non-Native faculty, they have to really think through and work with us to find ways to mentor these students, these PhD students, junior faculty that are coming to our institutions, and figure out ways to provide mentorship. And as we continue the conversation here, to continue to reimagine and redevelop the idea of mentorship, that is not just you, the one with the wisdom, mentoring the junior person, but how it is a working relationship and a mutual relationship of mutual learning. And so the more diverse PhDs and the more diverse junior faculty we bring to the university. And again, there's the other point of the larger settler anxiety, which we can address as well. But if we can reimagine mentorship and see it as an opportunity to learn from each other, right? And that the university was created primarily for a certain group of people. And now if we're bringing a few more, what a great opportunity for everybody to learn from each other, right? And work together to provide an environment where people can thrive. I know that's kind of like, very, I don't know, visionary and something that we would like to get to, but I guess the point I want to start with is that non-Native, primarily white faculty, need to come on board, those allies, because we need more, because we don't have enough people to mentor the new generations coming in. And so I just wanted to put that one out there as we have the conversation. And another point I guess I'll make when strictly speaking about mentoring is that I've been trying to also see it as a relationship building with my mentors, and some are temporary and some are like forever mentors, and that's going to happen throughout our academic and professional life course. And we have a good reason to focus on junior faculty and PhD students, but even when you get to a place like myself, where I'm tenure and full professor, I still have lots of mentors, and I continue to get new mentors because, as you know, we're gonna reach a level of expertise in some area, but in some area, right? And there's many other areas where we don't have expertise, and so the mentoring relationship is not something we do for junior people. It's something that it's just part of our lives, right? And even when we take it out of academia, right? And we take it now to our indigenous communities and other non-indigenous communities, we have always relied on elders and people in the know, right? To teach us how to be adolescents, and then how to be adults, and then how do we get old. And so the teaching and the mentorship is forever. And I'll stop there for a second for Julie.
Well, That was so well said, Roberto and Karina. I think just to add to that a little bit, I too felt especially when I started graduate school, but even as an undergrad as well, very isolated. I don't know if there were any other Native students in my graduate program or, my university. So I found myself really trying to connect with other students of color and also international students. And we bonded together and, really formed a tight group throughout graduate school that helped me get through that process in terms of, studying for exams together, trying to work on our comps together, our prospectus for our dissertation, practicing together, working with each other, forming writing teams. And that was really, really helpful to get me through graduate school. And then I think once I finished school and was starting to work in communities and we moved out here to the Southwest, again, I really tried to seek out people who could provide different types of mentorship, not just in the academic setting, but also in the community, and elders and other community members who could really help guide me through this process of doing community engaged research. But I also, in terms of the academic side of things, found myself really gravitating towards people that had backgrounds in the social sciences too, and community sciences. I had been a biology major as an undergrad. So when I went to graduate school, it was very intimidating for me to suddenly be in this environment with all these public health experts. I had no background in epidemiology or biostatistics or the social sciences because I was a biology major. So I think one of the things I found really helpful, and as for those of you who are mentors or mentees, it's just really trying to identify people who have maybe a different skill set, but also, a very diverse background and can bring in other disciplines, other life experiences, to really help me understand more broadly, what I'm trying to do with the public health work we were doing. And again, I think the community mentors are absolutely key. So that's kind of, and I agree with Roberto. I think it's a lifelong process. I think when you find mentors and mentees and you form that bond, it's usually a lifelong process. I mean, I have people I still go to today that are 60, 70, 80 years old or older, that I look to for guidance in my career and in my personal journey too. So those are just a couple points, but I'm happy to expand on them more if you'd like.
That's great, both of you. I think the 360-degree mentoring approach is something that, all of us have really manifested and think it's really important, where we have expertise, but in some of our cultures, there's even words for this, where you have an elder sibling and a younger sibling. And the idea is that you can become an older sibling given a context, and a younger sibling given a different context. So for us, I think it's fairly fluid and comfortable to be able to assume both mentee and mentor roles simultaneously, depending on the context and who we're working with. And we really value the experiences that our trainees and fellows, whenever they work with us, we have much to learn, but we can share and learn together. One thing that I think that Julie, you just mentioned, cultural mentors and the role of cultural mentors, that's really, really important, because a lot of our Native faculty, when they finally get a position, if they're lucky, they'll get to remain in their tribal communities or near their tribal communities. But quite often people don't. And so they're having to move to new locations where they have to get to know totally different tribal communities that may have absolutely no shared cultural or linguistic aspects with their own tribal people. And people just assume, oh, we're all Native, we don't always get along. And there's always other histories and so there's a big need for cultural mentors at the local level for our Indigenous faculty that move to a new location. It's really important to get that local knowledge and connectedness as soon as possible. It makes a huge difference. The other thing is, just because people are Native in academia doesn't mean they've been culturally connected growing up. And this is another reason to get connected with cultural mentors. We had a colleague who was a fellow on one of our projects, who had been, for family reasons, removed from her home, her Navajo community as a young person and was raised, hadn't seen or been part of the Navajo community directly since she was about 3 or 4 years old. She came to us saying, hey, I want to reconnect and I want to give back. And so service is really important to our communities. I mean, we have all kinds of different words, even in my language in Choctaw, we have many different words for service and the importance of being a helper and being connected that way. And so this young person was saying, hey, I want to give back to my community, but I want to do that in the right way and get connected and move forward in a good way. And so we were able to provide an opportunity where we were able to call on some Navajo HIV researchers who we knew who live on the Navajo res, and they actually held a coming home ceremony for her. And they started that process and that connection again. So those kinds of experiences are really important to be thinking about and really growing that cultural connectedness for those who are new to the territory and even those who've been in academia and maybe were not as culturally connected for a variety of reasons growing up. So that's really important. And the final thing I would say, just you guys triggered this thought for me, is the how many of us had learning gaps growing up because we were in educational systems that were problematic. I was put in an ESL class I grew up in Hollywood, California. So I got a Title VI, I think it is, Indian Education. I'm blanking on the title, but the Indian Education Act kind of went in during this period. And so I was in 2nd grade and I got switched over to ESL classes and I was a very shy, quiet kid. And I didn't say anything for weeks. And I was like, I don't know what's happening. Why are we speaking English so slowly? I don't understand. I was so confused. And so, but because I started getting tracked at that point in my educational experience, every year I was tracked into the lowest track and slowly would have to move up to an advanced track by the end of the year, only to start over in the lowest remedial track again. And that caused a lot of disruption in my experience. So I had a mentor who was Yaqui, Dr. Rosina Becerra, when I was a doctoral student, and she was very forthright with me. And she said, Karina, do not take this personally, but you really need to work on your grammar and go and take some remedial English courses while a doctoral student. And I was like horrified at first. And then I thought, well, wait a minute, these are understandable learning gaps I have. I don't need to pretend that I don't have them and go do something about it. And it was one of the best experiences I had. But it's because I was in a safe situation with a mentor who was able to really talk with me about it in a way that didn't make me trigger all these old tapes like I'm not smart enough, I'm, the imposter syndrome and all that kind of stuff. And it's not to say I don't have that completely removed, but it was important to have a mentor to actually be able to talk to me and be honest with me about that. So, yeah. That's what you triggered for me, what you guys were sharing. Other thoughts? And also we can open it up as well to our community who's here right now. If people have some comments or thoughts or experiences that they have or questions. And while people are thinking about it, I also wanted to just link this to HIV research in particular. And one of the things that a lot of our people who have come up saying, well, I'm interested in HIV research, but it doesn't seem to be a priority in my community. So how do I do that? So that's one kind of challenge we have. Others have raised issues of feeling like, although the stigma has decreased with respect to HIV, but, people are like, why not Hep C? I mean, we really are more focused on Hep C, not HIV. Let's do something with respect to that. And the third is we don't have enough LGBT Two-Spirit people in the pipeline so that you have community representation asking the questions that need to be asked as well. And we need to do better with respect to that, I think. And Jim just said to feel free to raise your hand or include questions in the chat if you prefer. And Roberta and Julie, do you have anything specific to HIV that you want to talk about for mentorship?
So sorry, the phone just threw me off. Well, one thing that, I didn't set out to be an HIV researcher when I first started. I came from community mental health here in the streets of Seattle. And at that point, I was introduced to HIV and people living with HIV, and we were trying to come up with housing. This is the early 90s, right? But at some point, I was offered a fellowship to learn more about it, and I took it because I needed the fellowship. But it was immediately it became apparent that sure, I was now working with this new virus and this new epidemic of HIV, but in looking at the social determinants of that, right, and the health inequities and inequalities that affected certain people, I was like, oh, this is similar to my work in community mental health and substance abuse. It's the same issues that are affecting a certain group of people. So it's not HIV's preference for this group or that group, it's the larger social, and that just clicked with me, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm totally on board, because again, I saw all the intersections that make some populations more vulnerable, as well as the intersection of HIV with mental health and trauma and all the other things. So it was an easy adaptation of where I was going. And throughout the years now, all the work at different levels, where community-based clinical trials, EPI, all the work around HIV that I learned came in handy for COVID, right? Because again, it was the same, some new virus, but some of the same issues, right? And so one thing that so we quickly switched to COVID, right? For a few years, is that if someone is working with a certain community or group, and I'll say that the skills that you will learn in HIV, first of all, it's an issue that there still needs a lot of work, right? So is that the skills will come in handy to deal with Hep C or COVID or any other issues that are happening in the community. And so the skills, the research skills, as well as the grant writing and everything, will be very useful to deal with other issues at the community level. And so and I don't know if that's where the question, but I think the skills are transferable to many other issues at the community level.
And the only thing I'll add to that, because I think a lot of my work also was very similar in terms of focused more on that intersection of HIV, substance use, mental health issues. And, for me, it was so important. There were so few of us doing that kind of work at that time with Indigenous communities. Karina and Roberta and I and a few others, it was just really a handful of us out there. And I think it was really important to connect with each other and be able to have these conversations about, how things are working or not working in communities. But again, relying so much on our community partners to tell us what will be appropriate and what won't be appropriate, and how to really engage respectfully around these topics, because in some ways these were very taboo topics to discuss, and there were certain ways of doing this. So it was a very big learning curve, but looking at other models that are out there too. I know we looked a lot at other types of health issues, whether it was more substance use prevention or other things, but to help us build these models that included this intersection of health conditions. So it was a challenging time to do these kinds of things, but I think really gratifying, and again, involving community in all different aspects at all levels was absolutely critical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are great points. I know that my pathway to HIV research started a little bit as an undergrad. I worked with Dr. Janet Lever at UCLA to look at women in general, not Native specific, and HIV, and that was in the 80s, early 80s. And it wasn't until 1995 when I graduated and I went with my PhD, and I went to New York City, to Columbia University for my first appointment. And I went to meet she's the clan mother of the community back then, Rosemary Richmond. And she was the director of the American Indian Community House. And I remember I went to meet her, And at that point, I was doing mental health research. That was where my primary focus was, and looking at the role of identity and mental health outcomes. Anyways, I went to go meet the elder, and she really was in charge of the community. And she said to me, she said, what can you do? What can you do to help us? And I said, well, I do mental health research and blah, blah. She goes, we don't need that. And I was like, oh, okay. She said, I need someone to do HIV research. And I haven't really done it, and I kind of said, oh, well, I don't do that yet. And she says, well, I'm not asking. And so I knew culturally that meant she's telling that I need to go do HIV research. And I said at the time, can I bring in my partner, Dr. Jane Simone, because that's her area of research. And she said, yep, that would be fine. But we need to get help. And I said, well, what's going on? And this gets to the invisibility issue in our communities. She said the New York City at that time had only documented one death due to AIDS for American Indians, Alaska Natives. But she had been to 12 funerals for that already in the city. And she said, so I think we have an epidemic, but somehow it's not being tracked or documented, or we're being misrepresented in, death data and other kinds of data. So she said, can you fix that? I go, I don't know if I can fix that, but we can try to get an idea of what the issues are. And one of the early works that we did, and this gets to, communities also have fears, right? Community also has fear, and they're very protective of each other, rightfully so. But sometimes that fear isn't entirely founded. So in some level. So I'll give you an example. There was they asked us to look at, we wanted to do a basic survey to get a sense of what the general knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors were around HIV. And earlier that summer, a non-Native woman made a big mistake at a prevention powwow. She went to the powwow, and she got everyone in a circle, and they're all giggling and talking about sex and all of this stuff. And then she opens up her bag and pulls out a dildo to practice putting on a condom. Well, she was standing there, left bag with this in her hand in the middle of the powwow. People scattered and left and refused to talk to her the rest of the day. She's like, oh my God. So the community took that to mean we can't talk about this from that experience, and it's going to offend people. And I said, well, wait a minute, let's talk to the elders. Well, the grandmas were like, you have to talk about sex. The grandmas were telling us we had to do this. It's the middle-agers and the younger people like, don't talk about it, don't talk about it. So we actually, because we got the grandma's blessing, we said we can, do this in a really culturally relevant way. We can ask the questions in a way that's not offensive. And we were able to do it. And I'll never forget, I had an 85-year-old grandma call me up on the phone and wanted to participate in the survey. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to know the sex life of grandma. I just remember that. So I said, you know what? I think it's great. You're going to do a survey, but I'm going to have, we have a non-Native colleague who's going to do it for you. All right. And she's like, okay, that's fine. So it was just figuring out how to navigate around some of these things. And, sometimes we get almost too reactive with communities instead of just saying, is that okay? All right, that's the initial fear. Let's break it down. Let's look at it. What's driving it? What are we worried about? And getting those grandmas involved around HIV has been fantastic. Older grandmas, they really, for the most part, have been the ones who are calling for action. So get the grandmas involved.
Yeah, so I wanted to mention that the grandmas are involved, are important because they had grandmas, and those grandmas had grandmas, and those grandmas. So there's a lot of knowledge, right, and empirical knowledge that was transferred, and people made mistakes, and they learned, and then they tried again, and they went better. So that's empirical knowledge that has been transmitted from generations to generations, and we don't use a lot of that knowledge, because less than 1% of those in the academy who are producing knowledge are not from those communities. Therefore, the knowledge that we use for HIV prevention and many other issues is the knowledge that comes from the majority in the academy. And what is that, right? It's primarily Western science, which all its glory and good things, right? I was trained in that, and I love it too. So nothing wrong with it. But there's many other epistemologies and ways of doing things that then are ignored or not used. And then we as a humanity, as a whole, miss out, because we don't take those experiences and that knowledge into consideration, right? And it's by just having more people in the academy. That's where I live, right? So that's why I'm talking about. But also in other parts of society, is that we bring some of that knowledge to bear in how we do HIV prevention in this case, right? And Karina and Jane and others have come up with the indigenous stress and coping method, right? And a few others, right? So without them, we wouldn't have that. We will continue to use IMB, which is really good, and CBT, and in other theoretical frameworks that inform our HIV prevention efforts, right? And they're all good and fine, right? But there are others, right? And so if we don't bring more people in, right, again, we miss out on many other opportunities to increase our toolbox to deal with these complex issues that we deal with in public health and social work and the health sciences. Right? And those, back to the mentoring, right? Like, again, we are trying to increase the pipeline, but not everybody makes it too, right? I mean, and also that statistic of the less than 1%, at the associate level was like 3%, and the assistant level was like 5%. It's still very low, but obviously we lose people along the way, right? And those are the people that we need to keep. So we get to that 5% full professor and then increase that, right? In order to bring those epistemologies and that knowledge that will help us all, not just Native communities, but it's going to help all humanity. The more tools, the better, right? And so therefore, it's an effort that goes beyond us, but it's everybody and all our allies within the academy.
Lauren,
So
go ahead.
speaking of that, I wonder if we can spend a few minutes talking to both mentors and mentees as to some skills or some strategies on how to best engage. Because I'm thinking, again, there's just one professor in the whole School of Public Health for all 12 students, right? If we're lucky to have 12, right? And so I think mentees need to be aware of that, which I know they are, but you need to come prepared to your 15-minute session with your mentor and spend a good amount of time just checking in, but also with the questions you have, the things you want to learn, the plan you have, and how to best make the best of that half an hour that you want to have with your mentor, and be strategic about that, because your mentor is just pulling so many directions that you need to be strategic when you have that meeting. So I'll leave others for their strategies or ideas on how to best utilize that time.
Lauren asks, she said, you guys mentioned the need for cultural mentors. How have you gone about finding one? And have you found institutional support for cultural mentors or cultural mentorship programs? But the answer is yes to both for us. We have, through Big Heart, but also through the Indigenous HIV/AIDS Research Training Program, we build into the grant different funding for cultural mentors as well as scientific mentors. So we have both. People will get 2 primary scientific mentors and a cultural mentor. In some cases, we automatically assign a cultural mentor based on the needs of the person. So there are programs that will build that in and value that. And I can't speak for CFAR. I'm sure CFAR, I know Monica Gandhi's been involved in others. She's an incredible mentor, does research on mentoring programs and mentorship. So I would steer you in that direction to look at some of her work. That's been really important. And then Roberto mentions the thing about this has to do with the cultural taxation. We're pulled in so many different directions that sometimes we end up, and I'll own that. I haven't been able to be as good of a mentor sometimes as I want to be because I'm pulled in too many directions. So we need even supports for, higher level mentors, older senior mentors to help navigate some of that. Again, I think building the workforce is important, but I think the piece that I don't want to lose, which Roberto acknowledged, is the value of different epistemologies and ways of knowing and doing things. So if I have a student who comes to me and said, hey, can we do HIV prevention, but can it be around land-based healing? That's exciting because that gets outside of kind of current ways of thinking and looking at new ways of approaching that are in sync with our indigenous knowledges and our focus on restoring relational ways of being in the world. and tying it to the land and place. I mean, a lot of our Native scholars are saying we have to get out of this kind of idea, especially with HIV. Everything's, so focused on the urban context and the urban environment that, what if we did a program where we took people back out into nature, into the environment, to really talk about their body, their life, and what they want to do for themselves. So, things like that are exciting. So we have to allow lots of room for that to come to the academy.
I just want to add too that another way that I have found cultural mentors is through many of our projects have community advisory boards or some type of group that works with us. And that's really been critical for me in terms of having someone to help guide me along. And they may have other people they can refer me to as well in the community. So that's really important. And then we're really lucky here at NAU because we do have an applied Indigenous Studies department, and we have a number of Indigenous faculty and others who are serving kind of more in a role as cultural advisors too. So that's been really helpful to us.
Other thoughts and questions? Oh.
Based on the work of Monica Gandhi that you mentioned, Karina, she's a professor at UCSF and CFAR there. We've been collaborating with her with CFAR here with Deepa Rao, and also doing our own research on mentorship in order to develop a mentorship program within the health sciences. And so we did some focus groups and some individual interviews with junior faculty from communities of color. And some of the things that it's just lots of material is that something that they were finding in their mentoring relationship at the University of Washington was that they felt like they were not seen as humans, right? Like they wanted people to just like, okay, you need to learn Stata. This is what you're gonna do, and without any of that relational aspect that Karina mentioned earlier, to learn more about your family, tell me more about where you come from, what you do, why do you want to do this, et cetera, et cetera. So, and I think that applies to many indigenous scholars as well. So again, now talking to potential mentors, indigenous or non-indigenous, let's remember who these people are. They are just individuals like us. They're our cousins, our brothers, our nephews, and they want to be seen as that, right? As people who care about community, and that's why they are in public health or medicine or social work. And again, sometimes it's because we may be all pull in different directions, but let's never forget why you're there and why they're there, which is beyond learning stats, right? It's a commitment to making community better. And just wanted to mention that's what several people, it became a theme in our analysis. Like, I just feel like I'm not seen as a human being. I'm just another person there trying to get a grant. And there's more to me than that. And I think that was very important for all of us to remember, right? Why we do what we do. It's beyond getting the grant.
Right. Questions? Canada asked a question about where to get some resources for non-natives working with natives for mentoring, and I just attached 2 articles that I have on that. And Julie, and Roberta, if you have one, please feel free. Please feel free to attach any materials to the chat for folks if you think that are important and relevant. And I think Roberta brings up a really important point about this is about stopping the suffering in our communities and the importance of that and being connected to that. And even working on ourselves to decolonize as well, and being mindful, mindful of that even in our interactions as well. Sometimes we have to even work on ourselves in these situations as well. We're all part of navigating settler colonial experiences and attitudes and structures, and how we do that really does matter on behalf of our trainees, but for our own health and well-being as well. The way I think about different models from Western to Indigenous models and theory, these are tools, and our Indigenous people have always been, I imagine the grandma in a community, when a stranger came in and they brought some goods, the grandmas all went out to go check out the goods. And they looked at some goods and they said, oh, we'll take this, we'll trade for that, and then others tools they rejected. They said, I don't need that. And the key to that is twofold for me. One is if we understand that these are tools and it's how we relate to these tools that really matters. And what matters is it's on our terms, like the grandmas had it on their terms, then the tools don't have to be unhealthful. They become unhealthful when they're imposed on our communities, and they're imposed in a way that kind of perpetuates settler colonial processes and practices. So when we have a chance to work with tools, it's not that the IMB model might not be helpful, but it's not prioritizing that from the standpoint by which you draw inference and all kinds of thinking. Instead, you might start with an Indigenous framework and way of approaching it. And you might say, hey, IMB helps me understand a little bit of mechanisms of change. I like how that, but I'm going to talk about it from an Indigenous perspective. So I'm not talking about like slapping a medicine wheel on an existing HIV paradigm or slapping a feather on it, because that still prioritizes non-Indigenous thinking and approaches. What I'm saying is that you start with an Indigenous approach, and you might be able to pull some of these things in ways that make sense to the particular community, but it would have to be reframed. So, for example, we use the IMB model it's not a HIV project, but it is substance abuse prevention. But we talk about information being in truly deep Indigenous knowledges around our ancient practices and teachings, and that information is what actually will motivate behavioral change, not just didactic or information that's if you take a vitamin a day, and make the pain go away or something, but really getting at the deep relational way of understanding ancient stories as teachings for how we live our health well. And so we were able to use the IMB model in that way, but it was from a framework of original instructions, relational way of being in the world that was really the undergirding that whole thing. So I just want to share that with you. So there's ways that these can work together when done creatively. Julie and Roberto, do you have anything else that you want to say?
The only thing I might add, to the question that was raised about thinking about working with Native students is I know that, of course, COVID had tremendous implications and hardship for so many, and a lot of our Native students really needed to return to their home communities during COVID to help their families. So one of the things we really tried to do is develop, with technology, more opportunities for students to be able to take classes through hybrid courses and to communicate more through Zoom. I mean, that's happened all over the country, but I think we did try to really place more emphasis on that, because in some communities, the internet infrastructure may not have been there to be able to do some of that. So we had to pivot and really be creative about ensuring that our Native students were still able to engage and interact, in coursework and research projects and in other areas too. So.
Roberto, anything else from you as we near the top of the hour?
Just again, how for me at the personal level, mentoring relationships have been like the biggest part of my journey, really. I mean, I took the classes, I passed my stats and all that stuff, but I did what I needed to do. But without mentors and people to talk to teach me things, to tell me where to go or not to go, has been key throughout my career, and it continues to be. And it has enriched my personal and professional life. And so, so while it may become at times an academic topic, it's beyond that. It's about relationship building and getting good people in your life that will guide you, which happens outside of the academy as well. You know, we try to surround ourselves with people that will lend us a hand and help us guide our journey. So, so get as many mentorship relationships as you can.
Great. Well, I just want to, oh, sorry, go ahead, Karina.
No, I just want to put a quick plug in. We are actually recruiting right now for the Indigenous HIV/AIDS Research Training Program for our new set of fellows. So if you know anybody who is American Indian, Alaska Native, Indigenous Latinx, or in Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander, please, and if they're, it's early career investigators, postgrads, postdocs, those are all eligible for it. And it's, you know, so please forward them to us. Would appreciate it. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Karina, Julie, Roberto. This was such a wonderful session and a great way to wrap up our things for 2022 with Big Heart. I think it's a session that many folks are going to view later, and some of us will probably, I know myself, will come back to many of the lessons and the stories that you've shared. It's really, really valuable for all our growth as mentors and our progress in terms of continuing to be in that mentee role as well. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for the resources in the chat. And thank you to everyone for participating today. We wish you a restful, please take rest, and healthy and safe and relaxing end of 2022.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Kenneth. Oh, all right. Thank you, Roberto.
Thank you both. Thank you,
Bye.
Roberto. So good to see you.
Nice
Yeah,
seeing you.
great
Take
seeing you,
care.
Roberto.